I'm Robert Sloan.
I'm a professor of geology at the University of Minnesota, and I study dinosaurs. One of the things that a lot of people are concerned about that's connected to dinosaurs is how and why they died. And this is a problem like any other that is subject to proper scientific inquiry. How do you go about finding out why dinosaurs died? You can sit back in your desk and dream up ideas, and let me just read you some of the ideas that people have been suggesting. This is a quote from an old friend of mine at Princeton University. Authors with varying competence have suggested that dinosaurs disappeared because the climate deteriorated, became suddenly or slowly too hot or cold or wet or dry. Take your pick. Or that the diet did with too much food or not enough of such substance as fern oil. That was Nobel Prize-winning chemist Melvin Calvin. Calvin read a really awful historical geology textbook that said the Mesozoic was the age of dinosaurs and conifers and cycads, and the Cenozoic was the age of mammals and flowering plants. And since he noted that modern animals, when fed a diet of conifers and cycads, the plants have a laxative effect on them, decided that clearly the reason for dinosaur extinction was that they became constipated and bound up. The only problem is this constipation had to go on for 70 million years, since the last 70 million years worth of dinosaurs actually fed on those flowering plants. From poisons in the water, or plants, or ingested minerals, by bankruptcy of calcium or other necessary elements. Other writers have put the blame on disease, parasites, wars, anatomical or metabolic disorders, slipped vertebral discs, malfunction or imbalance of hormone and endocrine systems, dwindling brain and consequent stupidity, effects of being warm-blooded in the Mesozoic world, racial old age, their genes somehow got tired. Evolutionary drift into senescent over-specialization, somehow they got too complicated and then died. Changes in the pressure or composition of the atmosphere, poison gases, volcanic dust, excessive oxygen from plants, meteorites, comets, and an asteroid impact. You may have heard about that one. Gene pool damage by little mammalian egg eaters that ate all their eggs. Overkill capacity by predators. Tyrannosaurus simply ate them all up. Fluctuation of gravitational constants. Well, that's the physicists. Physicists dearly love to take something that some people have regarded as a constant and make it into a variable. And if there was a sudden pulse of the force of gravity, they'd all simply die of fallen arches and slipped discs. Development of psychotic suicidal factors. That one is Sigmund Freud. He had no trouble explaining why dinosaurs became extinct. He had a much bigger problem explaining why other things didn't. Cosmic radiation, entropy, shifts of the Earth's rotational poles, floods, continental drift, extraction of the moon from the Pacific Basin, and drainage of swamp and lake environments, sunspots, God's will, mountain building, raids by little green hunters in flying saucers, lack of even standing room in Noah's Ark, and paleo-Weltschmerz. These are some of the ideas that have been proposed for the extinction of dinosaurs. They can't all be true. Some of them contradict each other. What can you do about trying to decide just how dinosaurs became extinct? Well, the thing to do is just what I'm doing right now. I'm sitting out in the Badlands of Montana in a region where the rocks around me were being deposited during the last days of the dinosaurs. And I take a look at all of the various sorts of changes that are taking place in these rocks. I looked specifically for a place that had rocks from just before the end of the age of dinosaurs and just after. Now, an extinction is an ecological calamity, a catastrophe. Extinctions such as this or any other are the result of something going wrong. Since extinction is an ecological catastrophe, the thing to do is to see just what was changing during the time that dinosaurs were going extinct. Did they go extinct all at once, or did it take a long period of time? Is there one reason for dinosaurs going extinct, or are there a great many? Well, as a matter of fact, there are as many reasons for extinction of dinosaurs as there were kinds of dinosaurs. In this particular batch of rocks, we have fossils of about 19 kinds of dinosaurs. We also have over 100 different kinds of other animals with backbones: fish, lizards, frogs, salamanders, birds, mammals, all living at exactly the same time as the dinosaurs. Some of these went extinct when the dinosaurs did, most of them did not. Many of them have modern living descendants that you have seen or perhaps even caught. So what do we do? What we do is collect fossils. We collect fossils with particular reference to the age of the rocks in which they occur. You've been looking at portraits of part of the Badlands of Montana. This area today is a Badlands, a semi-desert, a ranch country with very low human population density. It was not so at the time these dinosaurs were living and didn't look a bit like the area looks today. It was a region of a very, very flat coastal plain on the eastern side of the developing Rocky Mountains. Just to the east of the areas that we collect our dinosaurs, there was a seaway, an expansion of the Gulf of Mexico that reached all the way from Texas up through the Great Plains, all the way to the Arctic Ocean. The eastern side of this seaway is Minnesota. And it was a very broad tropical sea, very shallow, not as salty as modern open oceans, a little more brackish, loaded with sulfate ion, which today shows up in the peculiar flavor of the water that people get from their wells in the area. This seaway was warm and tropical, even though this part of Montana was just as far from the equator then as it is now. The whole world was warmer during the time of the age of dinosaurs. We go out to Montana as a class trip, a trip for training future paleontologists in the methods of field paleontology, how fossils are actually collected. At the same time, the collections that are made are used for research purposes to study just exactly what's going on during this time of major community change. The modern community is a short grass prairie in a region of intense river erosion. The rivers don't flow with water all the time. Most of the time they're dry, but every time it rains, there's a very considerable amount of mud carried off the hills and down into the rivers. Some of the things that you might see today are pronghorn antelope, the oldest living native North American hoofed mammal. It's been here in North America in one form or another for the last 18 million years. You might see buffalo preserved in some of the parks. There are, of course, mule deer, but the buffalo have in general been replaced with beef cattle, mostly Herefords and Hereford Angus crosses. The plants that you're going to see all the time are, of course, several kinds of short bunch grass, prickly pear, sagebrush all over the place. Basically, sage develops in regions that get overgrown, and the sage will move in where the grass has been removed by grazing. There's yucca. There are some very, very beautiful legumes. There's the absolutely gorgeous little seagull lily that has very tiny leaves, an absolutely gorgeous white flower that sticks out in the spring. Bluebells. The only trees in the area are juniper trees for the most part, or a few cottonwoods along the creek perhaps. But junipers tend to grow in regions where there are springs, and there are a few springs. What rainwater there is either runs off and carves canyons or soaks into the ground and comes out 200 yards away in a spring that will support the growth of a very, very low juniper. The fact that there is this low rainfall and this very limited amount of vegetation means that there is continuous erosion going on, and continuous erosion is what a fossil hunter really needs in order to get good fossils. Fossils, once they're exposed to the surface of the ground, don't last very long. If they aren't collected, they're destroyed by the weather. But if they are collected, it doesn't make any difference in the long run, because after the winter and springs snow and melt, there will be a fresh crop of fossils exposed as more and more of the mud is removed. So this kind of area, the badlands, as most people call them, are really the good lands for those of us who are fossil collectors. We camp because there's no place else to be. And the place we camp is in a state recreation area where there's a gorgeous beach and some shelter houses to get us out of the ever-present wind. Some of the pictures you'll see in this tape have little wind sounds blowing over the background. There's no way you can get out of the wind in this country. It's just there all the time, blowing at any speed from 15 miles an hour, which is about as slow as it gets, all the way up to 70 and 100 miles an hour. Getting tents that stay up in winds like that for 6 weeks is fun, and we've managed to find a few tents that will do just that. But most tents just get ripped up with the first major rainstorm. We camp on the shores of the Fort Peck Reservoir. The Fort Peck Reservoir is a place where the Missouri River was backed up for 190 miles from the Fort Peck Dam. The Fort Peck Reservoir is backed up by a dam that was built across the Missouri River during the late phases of the Depression. Roosevelt picked this place to put a dam because in the middle 30s, people were hungry for work. Everyone was out of work. People were starving. Anything that could be done that would be useful, that would employ a lot of people, was worth doing. He built this 3.5-mile long dam, 500 feet high, across the Missouri River at Old Fort Peck. And it backed the river up for 190 miles, halfway to Great Falls, Montana, and 40 miles up the arm that we go on, camp on, the Big Dry arm of the reservoir. This reservoir was put in for several purposes. The ostensible purpose was for flood control on the Missouri River, and to be sure, since this and the other major dams have been put in on the Missouri no longer floods. It is a controlled river. You no longer can run steamboats all the way from St. Louis to Great Falls, but on the other hand, you don't have the massive river floods that used to be there. The first thing we do is train the kids how to look for fossils. The fossils that we look at or look for consist of everything from great big dinosaur bones, 3 and 4 feet long, to little bitty teeth of animals the size of mice. And it takes very different ways of looking for things of this sort. The big ones are hard to avoid finding. You stumble over dinosaur bones, and it's difficult to go 15 minutes walking through the Badlands without finding some dinosaur bones. On the other hand, looking for the fossils of the rest of the 100 kinds of animals with backbones requires a rather different approach. The first place we always go is a place called Bug Creek Anthills. Bug Creek got its name back in 1906. Barnum Brown of the American Museum of Natural History in New York found a skeleton of this tyrannosaur at the mouth of this creek where it flowed into the Big Dry Creek. This was a very large animal, 50 feet long. The head's about 6 feet long. You can see what it looks like in this model. That animal was so big, as it was preserved in the rock, that what Barnum had to do was actually make a wagon under the fossil as it lay in the rock, and then carved the fossil loose and used several teams of horses to haul this wagon out to the railroad 50 miles away. It was a real chore. The net result was that one of the common names for fossils that people always use is bug for some reason. And since this was the biggest bug any of the ranchers had ever heard of, they named the creek Bug Creek, and Bug Creek it's been ever since. This is the bug of Bug Creek. On Bug Creek, there is a very famous fossil locality. What it is a sandbar that was deposited on the edge of a river late in the Cretaceous, only a couple of 100,000 years before the asteroid hit. This particular locality is extremely rich in fossils. No one can manage to avoid finding fossils, but in order to find all the very tiny fossils, what you really must do is get down on your stomach and on your elbows or your hands and knees and literally crawl across the rock face. If you don't crawl with your eyes as close as possible to the ground, you won't see the fossils. And let me show you why. Here is a tooth of a mammal, a large multiverculate about the size of a woodchuck. And here, picking these things up is always a problem. Here, sitting on my finger, is the biggest upper tooth in the upper jaw of the oldest hoofed mammal in the world. This is the animal whose descendants are things like hippopotamus and rhinoceros and elephant and deer and horses and tapirs and sea cows and even whales. Making a small collection of the fossils on the bare rock outcrop, it then becomes necessary to show how you can greatly increase the number of fossils collected per hour. The technique is an old one. It's been used since the 1840s, and what it consists of is sacking up the sand in which the fossils occur, carrying it off in ton quantities, pickup full, off to a washing site where you put the sand in a screen and wash all the sand out, leaving the fossils trapped in the screen. This is what the screens look like. This small box with a window screen side and bottom does a very effective job of collecting these fossils. What we do is put about 30 pounds of sand in one of these screens. We have up to 200 of them at a crack, and then proceed to carry them out into the water, shake them in various ways underwater. The sand goes away, falls into the bottom of the lake, adds to the beach, and the fossils are trapped. After the screens are set aside to dry, then the fossils can be poured out into a sack, brought home, and sorted out. The next day, having washed all of these fossils in this somewhat chilly reservoir while it's June, that water is still very, very cold. We went back to a locality about a mile east of Bug Creek Anthills called Russell Basin. Russell Basin has a number of things in it. One of them is a rather gorgeous palm frond. Here is a piece of it that we brought home for the university collection. It is a very, very large palm frond, about 6 feet wide and 6 feet long, so it was a very large tree. This, above all, should stress to you just how very different the plants were at the end of the age of dinosaurs in Montana than they are now, even though it was in the same place in the world. We found this beautiful palm leaf in Russell Basin, but we went over to Russell Basin specifically for something else. One of the reasons that has frequently been quoted for causing the extinction of dinosaurs is the impact of a 14-kilometer or 9-mile diameter asteroid, a big hunk of rock that blasted a crater on the order of 200 miles across and spread a layer of dust clear up into the stratosphere and all over the world. So this was a catastrophic event. But how catastrophic was it? In the sea, the effect of having all this dust in the air essentially put out the sun. There was enough dust so the sun's rays couldn't reach the surface of the sea, and the floating plants of the sea died, and most of the animals in the sea starved to death. Only a very few things managed to survive. On land, it's not nearly as catastrophic. To be sure, there was about 6 months when land plants couldn't grow. But on the other hand, there was a lot of vegetation around. And so even the dinosaurs could find enough to feed on. The result is, although many people have proposed that the asteroid impact was the cause of dinosaur extinction, in fact, it really didn't do very much. Out of the 30 kinds of dinosaurs that were present in Montana 10 million years before the end of the Cretaceous, at most one kind went extinct because of the asteroid. Now, all the others went extinct for other reasons. What are those reasons? Well, there are at least 5 of them. The first one is that global temperature dropped by about 10 degrees Fahrenheit over a 10 million year period. It's a slow, steady drop, and in effect, this changed vegetation all over the world, squeezed the tropical vegetation closer and closer to the equator, and squeezed the dinosaurs as well. There was also about a 400 feet drop in sea level. This is a very significant drop in sea level. And the effect was to move that ocean from in between Montana and Minnesota all the way south to Texas. And the effect on the climate in Montana was to make it hotter in the summer and colder in the winter. Both of these effects had major impacts on the plants. So you have the temperature change, the sea level change, and a major change in vegetation. The vegetation drops to less than half of what it had been in terms of kinds of plants. And the types of plant change considerably, from a lot of lush, very highly edible flowering plants to a lot of things like redwoods and cypress that are not very digestible at all. This lowered the carrying capacity of the land so far as dinosaurs was concerned, and the dinosaurs drop out one by one during this period of time. Fully 60% of all those kinds of dinosaurs had gone extinct by 200,000 years before the asteroid impact when Bug Creek Anthills was deposited. There were still 12 kinds of dinosaurs left, and we get our fourth reason. At Bug Creek Anthills, for the very first time, we have the immigration into North America of some animals whose ancestors came from Asia. The earliest hoofed mammals and some of those multituberculates are to be found in Asia first. The dinosaurs there were coping with them. But when they came over to North America, there was a completely new group of dinosaurs they were not adjusted to, and they simply took off. They very rapidly increased in diversity and abundance. We go from one kind of hoofed mammal to 3 to 5 to 7 to 8 in the span of 250,000 years. And at the same time, the number of dinosaurs at exactly the same localities goes from 12 to 11 to 8 to 7 to 5. As the dinosaurs go down, the hoofed mammals increase, and this competition between hoofed mammals and dinosaurs is a major cause of dinosaur extinction, not the only one. Finally, the asteroid hit during the middle of this process, and just before the asteroid there were 12 kinds of dinosaurs, just afterward 11. So there's not one reason for dinosaur extinction. There's really as many reasons as there were kinds of dinosaurs, and they did not all go extinct at the same time. That's the kind of evidence that we got by this brute force collecting of many fossil localities, very, very carefully dated in sequence in one area. It could not have been done in any other way, and the result is this is one of the more important regions for fossils across this dinosaur extinction anywhere in the world because of the work that we've put in on it. Having gone to Russell Basin, the next place we went to was Harbicht Hill. Harbicht Hill is a very important locality which was found back in 1935 by Darwin Harbicht, who was then an engineer working on the dam project. Fort Peck was a boom town of 10,000 employees and over 50,000 people out here in the middle of nothing. And all people had for recreation was dancing, drinking, and collecting fossils, and most people did all three. Harbicht literally would lead skirmish lines of 300 amateur fossil collectors lined up in a row, marching through the Badlands, collecting every fossil they could find. And they found some spectacular fossils and spectacular fossil localities. One of these was a very important locality, the first one found anywhere in the world where there were hoofed mammals and dinosaurs in the same locality. He sent these fossils into the American Museum in New York, and Walter Granger, who was one of the chief collectors and paleontologists of the American Museum, came out to Montana in 1935 to take a look. Granger came out, made additional collections. Harbicht and Granger actually made a screen out of the bottom of a chair and some galvanized screen wire and screened the sand on this hill for fossils. The fossils went back to the American Museum. A photograph of the hill went back, but Granger died of a heart attack on the way home, and not all the information was preserved. So one of the results was that the exact location of this locality was gone. In 1962, we went out there specifically to try and find it. We knew it was a mile away from a dinosaur collected by Dr. Case of the University of Michigan, except the people at Michigan didn't have any records on where Dr. Case got his dinosaur exactly. We knew it was in a school section, that is, a piece of land owned by the state, and all the money from that land was used to support the schools. But there's 2 school sections for every 36 square miles, so that didn't help much. We checked with some of the ranchers who had been there during the 30s where they had gone to school and where Dr. Case may have collected his dinosaur. We were led to one school section. We started looking near it, and we found a very important locality called Purgatory Hill. Unfortunately, that wasn't the locality we wanted. And we finally relocated Harbicht Hill, as it came to be known, because one of the amateur fossil collectors of Fort Peck had made a map. And on this map, at a scale of 1/3 of an inch to the mile, here was this little spot labeled Mammal Butte, 1 mile away from Dr. Case's dinosaur. We went to that spot. Lo and behold, we exactly duplicated the fossil collection, which is a very unique one. Nothing like it has ever been found anywhere else. We found earlier and later collections, but nothing exactly the same age as this. We also found the screen that Harbicht and Granger had used. So we knew we had found the place. It exactly matched the photographs in the collection.
These three bones are thigh bones of primitive hoofed mammals. This one is a middle-sized one, about the size of a large skunk. This one is the biggest one around. It's about the size of a raccoon. Both of these hoofed mammals have thigh bones quite a bit bigger than those at Bug Creek Anthills. This is over 3 times as large. This is a piece of lower jaw of this middle-sized one. You see the 2 back teeth and part of the lower jawbone. Those teeth are very efficient teeth for grinding both plant and animal food. The diet of this animal, Protungulatum gorgoon, was about like that of a modern raccoon. It would eat plants, vegetables, and small animals very, very nicely. The descendants of this animal grew up to be hoofed animals like horses and cows and rhinoceroses and elephants and some things that don't have hooves like whales. This one is in fact the animal whose living descendants are both the whales, all the way from the little porpoises to the great big blue whale, as well as elephants and sea cows. Whereas this one is the one that gave rise to horses and rhinoceroses and tapirs.
Harbict Hill is a very critical locality. It's the locality that first led us to this notion of this overlap between the first hoofed mammals and the last dinosaurs. It's also the locality where there are 5 different kinds of hoofed mammals and where there is the very earliest fossil of an animal that we can call a primate. Primates are the order of mammals to which humans, lemurs, monkeys, and apes belong. So it's our very oldest primate ancestor. All of us are descended from animals that were collected here at Harbict Hill and at Purgatory Hill. You're all Montanans by birth. Although just try and tell the Montana Game Commission you ought to get a resident elk permit. We of course have some rainy days out there. Even in a region where there's only 12 inches of rain a year, sometimes it does rain, and we have one. So we put that particular day to good use. After cooking up a nice, good, hot breakfast, we piled in the van and drove off to Fort Peck, where we looked at the museum in the powerhouse at the dam. Having spent quite some time at the museum and the power plant, we then went on to a locality known as the Pines, which consists of the marine muds deposited in the bottom of this shallow sea. This is another recreation area on the shores of Fort Peck, and in this particular locality, what we collected were ammonites, shells, coiled shells with chambers in them, of animals very much like squid, with tentacles and beak and very large prominent eyes, and a squirt that would drive them backwards very rapidly, as well as some fossil lobsters. What we have here are some of the fossils we collected along the beach at both Rock Creek Park and at the Pines Recreational Area. Both of these are on the Fort Peck Reservoir, but because the rocks are tilted, the rocks at water level are different ages in different places. The oldest rocks that we looked at were those of the dark gray muds of the Bear Paw Shale at the Pines. This dark gray mud was deposited in the Gulf of Mexico as it reached all the way from Arkansas clear on up to the Arctic Ocean, in between Montana on the west and Minnesota on the east. This Bear Paw Shale does have a lot of concretions. These concretions formed around fossils. They are basically places where the water percolating through the rock carried within it a mineral which was deposited starting at the center of a fossil and then gradually growing outward to produce these large, round, egg-shaped objects such as you see here. When you break these open, Sometimes you don't have anything at all. This is a case in point. But many of them have some very elegant fossils. Here, for example, is a fossil known as a scaphite. It is a cephalopod belonging to the group known as ammonites. In life, the thing floated in this position with the mother-of-pearl shell containing gas inside it that served as a flotation. This was the part of the coiled shell that was up. The soft parts of the animal are in here, and those soft parts are basically like those of a squid or an octopus. 10 arms, a parrot-like beak, and you're dealing with a floating animal with a hard shell. Could live in the surface parts of this ocean and feed on small fishes and other small animals. This shell is airtight, serves for flotation. The shell still shows the original mother of pearl. Most of the ammonites are coiled, like this one. People who don't know frequently call them snails, but they aren't. They're really cephalopods, like squids and octopus. Closely related to those things, but with a very different shell shape, are long, straight ammonites called baculites. Here is a partial shell of a baculite. Again, you see the mother-of-pearl luster. This is the end of the shell that contained the soft parts, and this is the end of the shell tapering clear on out to a point that held the gas. Here's a smaller one. There again is part of the gas chambers, and it's been broken open right there so that you can actually see the watertight chambers inside the shell that serve to hold the gas and provide this thing some sort of flotation. When these things floated, they floated in this pose, straight up and down, with the tentacles and the eyes and the beak looking straight down on the bottom. One of the neat things about these fossils is that wall in between the gas chambers is a very, very complicated surface. Here's one of these fossils that broke in a neat way so that you can see just what the gas chamber partition really looked like. You see, it's fluted like a pie crust, goes in and out. The exact pattern that partition makes where it meets the outer part of the shell turns out to be genetically controlled, and it changed every 500,000 years or so in a slow, steady, and gradual sort of way. How can you get an absolute number of millions of years ago for that particular suture pattern? Well, while this sea was here in eastern Montana, in western Montana, near Jackson Hole and Yellowstone and Glacier Park, the Rockies were rising. There were major volcanoes over there. Those volcanoes had many eruptions much bigger than the puny little eruption of Mount St. Helens. These eruptions spread volcanic ash all over the region, and these volcanic ashes can actually be dated by radioactive dating. And so you know the age precisely of the ammonites, like this one, that occur right next to those volcanic ash beds. The result is we have a calibrated datum point that we can then use to estimate the age of these fossils. There are some other radioactive dates. For example, there are some very good dates on that collision of an asteroid with the Earth that marked the end of the Cretaceous and the beginning of the Tertiary. Besides the scaphite and the baculite, there are lobsters here. And spread out on the table we have a few lobster parts. Some of them are particularly interesting. This little piece, for example, shows a complete lobster tail. This is the telson, the flipper at the end of the tail of the lobster that the lobster uses for its escape swimming. And this is the front part of the tail. This is one whole lobster that appeared when we cracked open one of these concretions. And this specimen shows very, very neatly a beautiful little lobster claw. Here is the main part of the claw. This is the part that is fixed fully, and this is the movable part of the claw. These weren't very big lobsters. They were a little bit bigger than the common crawfish, which is a little freshwater lobster that we have all over the United States. But they do represent some of the very earliest modern types of lobsters. This bear paw shale then what represented the sediments that were deposited in the deeper part of this sea. As the end of the Cretaceous drew near, the sea gradually retreated, and replacing that, we have the beach sands of the Fox Hills sandstone. The Fox Hills sandstone is very, very nicely displayed right on the wave-cut cliffs at Rock Creek Park. And the old beach sand, when it's taken apart again from a sandstone into loose sand grains, makes just the finest beach imaginable. Little pistol shrimp lived between high tide and low tide on the beach. And this sandy environment is, of course, very subject to being thoroughly disturbed by the waves. So the poor little shrimp living in these vertical burrows had to do something to keep the sand from collapsing and burying them. What they did was take their feces, roll them up into little balls, and stuff them in the walls of the vertical burrow. Here is one of these burrows as they are presently preserved. The organic matter in the feces served to attract iron oxide from the water as the water later passed through this sandstone, and these have been literally petrified, so that as you now find them, these burrows have the original sand washed away, and all you have left is a cylindrical little structure like this, full of iron-cemented sand, and with a surface that looks for all the world like a corn cob. These are the individual little balls of feces that were plastered in the sand. These shrimp were very regular in how they did it, and the result is their burrows lasted for a very long time. The name of the burrow is Ophiomorpha, and what it does is represent a very, very specific kind of habitat between high tide and low tide on a sandy beach. Anywhere you have sandy beach deposits in ordinary temperate or tropical oceans, from the middle of the Cretaceous period up to the present day, you can find little burrows like this. After the Fox Hills sandstone was deposited, the Rockies continued to come up and the sea level continued to go down. And the result was that the freshwater river sediments of the Hell Creek Formation containing dinosaurs spread into the area. The coastal plain spread from over near the Rockies in near Glacier Park and Yellowstone, clear across eastern Montana and North Dakota. And it is in these coastal plain river sediments that we find all the dinosaurs and the fossil plants and other interesting animals of the latest Cretaceous. The rain, of course, did stop, and having stopped, we then were able to go to our last major locality of this particular trip, Purgatory Hill. Purgatory Hill got its name for several good reasons. The very bottom of the hill is the layer of asteroid dust that represents the end of the Cretaceous. As we go up the hill, we get into progressively younger and younger rocks, but it's a very steep hill. So one of the things that we had to do in order to get up to the top, to do any work up there, and to carry things up and down, was to actually chop steps. Every year we have to recut the steps because the rain proceeds to wash them away. Our fossil locality is, of course, up at the very, very top of the hill. And there, 150 feet above the level of the plains, is a sandstone. At the very bottom of the sandstone, there is a layer of river sand that's loaded with clamshells and fossil snails. And in between the clamshells and fossil snails, there are teeth of 16 kinds of hoofed mammals and 20 kinds of multituberculates and all the other standard sorts of fossils, but no dinosaurs. By this time, the dinosaurs had long been gone. The age of this particular river channel, 150 feet above the level of the end of the Cretaceous, is 1 million years later. This is about 65 million years old. It's not a very rich fossil locality. We get one useful mammal tooth for every 3 person days of steady crawling over the bone-producing layer in the hill. So it's very poor in fossils. Nonetheless, by hauling 10 tons of sand down from the top of this hill, which was itself a chore, we were able to first wash it in the screen boxes in the reservoir, then dissolve the clamshells away with formic acid, and then do a magnetic concentrate of the remainder, and finally get things to the point where in picking in the laboratory we could find 12 mammal fossils per day. That's a big improvement over a third of a tooth per day, which is what it is at the surface. This is nearly the end of the story of what we do here. In effect, what we have done over the 27 years is essentially traced the major changes in kinds of fossils over a 2 or 3 million year period, watched the dinosaurs reduce in diversity and the hoofed mammals expand from one to many kinds of things, and come up with documentary evidence to show exactly how the ecology is changing. Many things were happening. All of them were negative so far as dinosaurs were concerned, and were positive so far as their small mammal competitors were concerned. This was a combined educational and research field trip. It's the sort of thing that I have routinely done most summers over the last 25 to 30 years. My students and I continue to study these rocks. We are not yet through with everything that can be done. People will be studying the rocks at Bug Creek and along the shores of the Fort Peck Reservoir in Macomb County, Montana, for the next 2 centuries, and will still not really finish the job. But we have solved many, many problems about dinosaur extinction. They did not die with a bang. They died with a whimper.